Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, our third cybersecurity in the series webinar on behalf of GCI. My name is Rob Russell. If you haven't joined any of the previous webinars, I'm a cybersecurity specialist here at GCI, and 15 years in the cybersecurity industry has taught me one thing, that backups are essential. So without further ado, I'd also like to introduce my co-host for today, David Fraser.
Hi there, morning everyone. I'm Dave Fraser, security specialist at GCI as well. Like Rob, I've probably been doing this for far too long, but let's crack on.
So for those of you that haven't been able to make it to our previous two webinars previous to this one, I'd just like to let you know that they are available on demand on our website, and which will have the YouTube link on there, so you can go back and have a look at previous webinars that we've done in this cybersecurity series. In this webinar, we're going to be talking about implementing your cybersecurity strategy with the right tools, not necessarily more tools. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to the first slide, and just to go over an agenda with regard to what we're going to be discussing here today. So sometimes it's a little bit laggy, so please bear with me. We were just talking about this before the webinar went live. There we go. So in part one, I'm going to be talking about security as a reactive industry. So we're going to be discussing what necessarily that means, and also what are the risks to having a reactive approach to security, with regard to the opposing approach being a proactive approach with 24-hour monitoring, say, for instance. In part two, we've got a proactive approach to security, implementing a proactive security managed service to save costs, maintain cyber resilience, and sustain regulatory compliance. We're going to be discussing what a holistic, integrated, and proactive approach to security looks like. And then in part three, we're going to be talking about the next steps, basically implementing your cybersecurity strategy with the right tools, not more tools. Where to start with proactive monitoring? We're going to go on to the next slide with regard to security being a reactive industry ever since the first security incident back in 1987, I believe, which was the first publicly wide virus worm, which was deployed by bad actors way back when. So as a result of viruses appearing in the ether, antivirus was created as a kind of solution to combat that threat. Essentially, all of the solutions you see on your screen now have been reactive solutions with regard to email, first being intercepted in 1991, I think it was, and the email scanning and email filtering coming into to kind of be a solution for that issue. Virtual private networks, obviously, for people intruding, kind of passing traffic within the internet, and two-factor multi-factor authentication, with the whole issue around identity online, saying you are who you say you are. Essentially, two-factor authentication is something you know and something you have traditionally. In many cases nowadays, this can be the form of a key fob, or something that text message that pops up on your phone. And multi-factor authentication can use several devices as a medium for that. And with regard to firewalls, everyone's familiar with the firewall. It's what people say to me when I'm in the cybersecurity industry. Okay, so you work with firewalls. They came about for to kind of solve the issue of hackers hacking into actual physical networks within a customer's environment. So essentially, all of these solutions have been reactive in terms of cybersecurity solutions in the industry over the last 20 years. As a result, the industry has become very complex. The cybersecurity landscape is probably one of the most complex landscapes with regard to solutions that we see here today. That's because of all the innovation that's been happening within the industry, but essentially trying to navigate around this vast, complex array. And what you can see on your screen now is just an example. It's a sample of some of the vendors within the cybersecurity space. Essentially, what you'll see is we've got network information security, we've got web security there, we've got the IoT that's made an appearance in recent years, but you can see how really complex the industry can be for some people, which moves me on to my next point. Complexity is the enemy of execution. I believe it was Tony Robbins, the inspirational speaker, that first coined that expression. However, I say it all the time, but I just paraphrase the last bit. Complexity is the enemy of cybersecurity. Essentially, it's very difficult to maintain a kind of an effective cybersecurity approach when you're layering on solutions. If you've been in this industry long enough, you're very familiar with the term security stack, and essentially that includes technologies such as MDM, device management, AV, firewalls, all of the technologies we've discussed so far. However, complexity can get in the way of you actually seeing an event that's taking place within your network. Essentially, when I say complexity too, this can also be in the form of logs coming through or alerts from your SIM system, or security intelligence and event management system. Essentially, what a lot of cybersecurity analysts call it is alert fatigue. A lot of alerts are sent through to analysts on a daily basis, and in many instances it can be like trying to find a needle in a needle stack. And so maintaining a proactive approach to making sure they're all set up correctly, or acquiring a managed service to make sure that's handled effectively is essential. With that, I'm going to hand over to Dave, who's going to take you through a much more proactive approach to cybersecurity. So thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Rob. So as Rob was saying, security information event management as a service really is about taking away that complexity. You've got a lot of different systems that ideally you're monitoring, and what a SIEM does is enable you to leverage the investment of those systems and also to prioritize the events according to what the system is, what the attack vector is, and generally just provide you with a prioritization of what you should be looking at first. So by collecting those logs in the system, the SIEM correlates them against each other and also utilizes multiple different system logs, effectively gluing them together so that where we've got a firewall log and then a Windows event log, you can see that that source IP address was both in the firewall log and the Windows event log, and therefore you can see that actually that login was from this IP. You can then correlate other events. So for instance, if prior to that login there were a load of failed logins, you can effectively say a remote party has attempted to log in and been successful. So by utilizing threat intelligence, which was kind of in the middle off slightly to the right on Rob's horrible diagram of all the different vendors that are in this space, threat intelligence is effectively community driven, more likely than not. And what that really is effectively creating entities and asset lists of known bad entities and threat actors. So we might say that that IP address I mentioned in the firewall log and the Windows event log, if we know it's a bad threat actor, we know that we need to react differently than if it was your office in Bristol. And the key thing here is because it's mostly community driven, you get the advantage of the fact that other people have been attacked from these IPs, and you then effectively are learning from that attack. Where we see the real value in our solution with this is the fact that our threat intelligence is integrated into all alarms, and that really gives you the fact that we're constantly monitoring against up-to-date threat intelligence rather than kind of retrospectively looking at an alert and then investigating. And what this really does is it ensures that real security incidents have the focus required, and the more informational alerts kind of get processed later on. Where that's really key is that needle in a haystack and kind of alarm fatigue that Rob was talking about. Because if we're just sending through the same brute force alarms to an analyst, what tends to happen from my experience of running SOCs previously is the analysts are effectively start copying and pasting the same remediation response to incidents, because effectively they're seeing 50, 100 of nearly the same thing, and it takes a lot of focus and analytical ability to then draw into what the difference is between alarm 46 and alarm 37. And that's really where the threat intelligence kind of reprioritizes them. And all of this, of course, is important because the response time here is the key thing. And by prioritizing and prioritizing the alarm, and automating the more simple tasks that are part of that investigation, we ensure that the malicious activity is stopped as quickly as possible. And the idea really behind that is obviously the business impact is less if the attacker is on your platform for less time, and primarily because if they can get onto your platform and they spread laterally across it, oftentimes you're then in a position where the logs of your security devices don't tell you where they've gone, and you're then into kind of CERT mode where you need forensic analysis of the end user computing devices rather than utilizing the security tools themselves. One of the ways that we make sure that these platforms are kept in line in terms of they're up to date, they're configured correctly, is we utilize a concept called watch points, which are effectively scheduled tasks within our IT service management system. These tasks automatically generate new tickets on a frequent basis, and that allows the analysts to effectively work from a queue where they're going and checking the health of the platforms. They're checking that the log sources are actually providing the logs that we expect. There's no bugs or errors. So if somebody's gone away and upgraded a firewall to a new version, and that new version has a slightly different log format, we'll identify that through a scheduled task, i.e. the watch point, rather than finding out after a security incident that, well, the reason that we didn't spot it is because we didn't have the logs coming in the right format. Where we also utilize watch points is as part of our compliance packs, and you can kind of see their Cyber Essentials Plus and those sorts of things in the middle of the slide. And that's really where we're providing a set of planned activities that need to be checked on a frequent basis, and that could be something as simple as auditing a firewall for its rule set. And where this really helps you is if you're in a situation where you have a compliance standard, or even if it's not a standard per se, so Cyber Essentials or ISO, if it's an internal policy, we can effectively adhere to that policy through these watch points. And that then gives you the confidence that there's a ticket for each thing that needs to be done. And there's confirmation the ticket was completed within an SLA, and then you can generate a report off the back of that to hand to the compliance officer or the auditor if it's external, that says we have done the things that we said we were going to do. So in general, the service that we offer really is to kind of make it draw it down to kind of brass tacks. It converts raw logs into an actionable item for a member of IT. So it takes all of these correlated events, it adds the threat intelligence to the top, and our analyst then turns that into a real world something that needs to be done. So that's something that needs to be done could be something as simple as blocking an IP address on a firewall, and obviously we have other service desks that can complete that activity should you need us to do that. Or it could be something far more serious, which is that actually that machine needs to be taken off the network. We need to do a full scan. The key here is what tends to happen with the security devices is you get some really useful information, but it's completely out of context. So the whole idea of our services and solutions here is to enrich the data, having correlated it across multiple log sources, and then basically give you a very simple, this is what you need to do. And the idea, kind of back to Rob's initial point, is that provides you with an ability to consider the investment that you've made into all these devices positively, because you're not there having to worry about people being trained up on understanding the formats. Effectively, the SIEM platform is just going to standardize that format for one of our analysts, and we do a self-serve offering as well, so we standardize it for your analyst if you wanted to go down that route. But fundamentally, it just gives you a something to do at the end. So we also offer, as I said briefly, some consultancy services around similar things. So Rob, could we flip to the next slide, please?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
And it chooses to do so. Here we go.
Thanks, Rob. So this slide effectively shows the different options available for the managed security services and those tactical services. Really pleased to let you know that dark web monitoring is now included across all of our managed security services. This is really good. So the recent addition to the platform effectively provides alerting for our customers when their data is leaked onto the dark web and to pastebin sites. We've got a slide on it a little bit later on. I'll cover it in more detail. But fundamentally, again, this is about the fact that if your data leaves your organization, ends up on Pastebin or the dark web, we're getting a proactive alert. We can then start to investigate why for you, and then we can tell you what you need to do. As I say, I'll go through it in more detail, but on the managed security side, the main takeaway here is that we've got a lot of different options, and they provide kind of incident response. So the fact that we identify the incident, we respond to the incident for you. Enhanced auditing, so in the middle there where we've got SIEM Secure Edge, we've got vulnerability assessments included from the external side, and we've also got Secure Edge, and that effectively is a managed firewall security service, but it concentrates more on the health of the firewall and ensuring the configuration of the firewall is in line with best practices. And then up to the kind of SIEM compliance watch, that really is about those watch points that I spoke about briefly, and ensuring that the scheduled activities that should be done on the IT estate as part of that compliance standard are done on the frequency, and just as importantly, that you can prove that they were done because you've got a ticket, you've got an audit log, and you've got a way to prove to your compliance manager or your external auditor that these things were done and they were done to the standard required and on the frequency required. Over to the far right, we've got the technical services, which we'll go through in a bit more detail. Thanks, Rob, and over to you.
Thank you. And it's probably worth me mentioning also, you probably saw on our first slide with regard to the SC Awards logo, that these are award-winning services that we have. So we recently won the best managed security service in Europe. So we're very proud of that. And all of these managed services are all part of that managed service that won that award. So I encourage anyone to look into that and see what your company may benefit from these services as such. So with regard to the Office 365 health check, I just wanted to give a brief overview with regard to what we discussed within our previous webinar, which was all around Office 365. We are conducting Office 365 health checks within our customers' environments on a first come, first served basis to everyone who's attending this webinar. With regard to having a practical check within your environment, looking at logs, we can look at logs for 30, 60, 90 days. In the initial outcome for the Office 365 security check, we're looking at back at 30 days. However, I'm not going to specify numbers, but over 70% of cases that we're seeing within people's environments at the moment, and within on their Office 365 environment, are coming out with some very, very interesting results. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you don't necessarily neglect or forget about this area of your infrastructure. So essentially, what our analysts are doing is they're looking in the location checks. They're looking for those impossible travel scenarios for your user logins. Say Dave Fraser logs in from Tokyo, then 5 minutes later logs in from Europe. These kind of suspicious activity, not necessarily malicious, and successful logins from known malicious IP addresses. Dave talked about our threat feeds there that come into play. Successful logins from known malicious user agents as well, and all of those mail forwarding rules analysis. So there was an interesting article out recently with regard to mail forwarding rules, whereby a very famous CEO's emails were being forwarded from his Office 365 environment because an attacker had got in there and put those forwarding rules in place. So this stuff is well worth looking into, and please get in touch if anyone would like to book in for a 365 health check. Over to you, Dave, to talk about the Office 365 hardening.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. So yeah, Office 365 out of the box effectively comes configured for availability. So the idea really is that if you purchase Office 365, you're probably not going to have that much of a lengthy engagement in terms of how you're going to use it, where you're going to use it from, and this is why things like impossible travel are possible in terms of users logging in from multiple locations, multiple geographical locations within too quick a time for them to have achieved that themselves. So that the reality of that would be that it might be that you've got a Citrix farm in the States and you're using a mobile phone in the UK. So you are effectively logging in from a US IP and a UK IP at the same time. So Microsoft couldn't very well configure Office 365 to block that, because then they'd end up with huge volumes of incidents coming into their help desks. So they've had to go down the route of just making it as available and functional as possible. What our Office 365 hardening exercise does is take that out of the box configuration, audit what's happening, similar to the health check, but kind of more audit it in line with how you do business. So it's to then perform that health check and customize your set of requirements so that you end up with a configuration that's in line with how you will actually use it, rather than every eventuality. The way that that's really done is by putting it into, so we effectively review, then we put it into learning mode. We look what would have been blocked. We ascertain whether that block was the right thing to block or not, and we obviously then tweak that. And then we go down to the fact that we put enforcement in place. And so once we've put enforcement in place, we shouldn't see the impossible travel, because in the scenario where somebody logs in from the US and then is also logging in from the UK, that would be configured to be an acceptable outcome rather than unacceptable. So we're effectively, by hardening, we're customizing the estate in such a way that we're not then generating false positives that then waste time through investigation. And the other side of the hardening is the kind of more tech side, which is we're doing things like SPF records, DKIM, DMARC. And what this really is all about is providing your end user with some confidence around the fact that the email they received was from the person that it's supposed to be from. So with kind of phishing education, you tend to see that you need to check the from field and make sure that the from field is a legitimate email address. Well, without the protections in place, then actually you can spoof the email to be from david.fraser@gcicom.net, and it will come through to you. So you wouldn't then be able to tell just by looking at the email itself whether it was me sending you an email or it was somebody pretending to be me. It also could provide some validation in terms of to the receiver of the email that you are a legitimate sender. And where that's really useful is it reduces the likelihood of you being put on blacklists, and therefore customers and suppliers aren't going to be in a situation where they're dropping your emails into the junk folder because you're not trustworthy in terms of your reputation with email. One of the other things it does as well is it changes the way that some of the configuration is done with regards to forwarding rules. And where this is really key is often an attacker will log into a mailbox, set up something like a sway page with an RSS feed, and they use that as an easy way of collating hundreds, if not thousands, of mailboxes data, so that it can analyze that and then work out what to do with that data and who to attack and how effectively they're going to try and steal either your data or ask you to make some form of financial payment to a bogus bank account. So this really changes the way the configuration works so that an end user can't do that. Fundamentally because there's very rarely a chance that an end user would want to do that, and therefore by turning off this availability feature, it pushes it to an admin task, which reduces the risk if a mailbox is compromised. And then in general, you've also got the mailbox auditing, which is the first point there, and this is about really the fact that you can audit far more of what's going on your users' mailboxes than is configured by default. So again, this is just to kind of ramp that up. And could we flip to the next slide, please, Rob?
Yeah.
It's great. So this slide, as you can probably see from my face, is far more interesting. It's a far more modern take on security, and that's why I'm really pleased that it's now rolled in across our security managed service suite. The real value add here is that normally dark web analytics are done as a reactive measure. So you end up in a situation where you've been compromised, you speak to a security team, the security team then go and do some incident response, whether that's a CERT, as you can do through ourselves, or an IT guy is just going and having a look. You might end up with a scenario where people are searching for usernames and passwords on Pastebin, various different forums that are used to distribute user data. And also the dark web itself. And of course, the dark web itself has its own challenges in terms of if you wanted to connect in to search for your data in the dark web, that in itself is a security risk, and you need to take some quite significant precautions there. Just installing the Tor browser on your main work PC is really not a good idea. So what this really does is it takes that relatively complex and convoluted search and it pushes it to the forefront of incident response. So rather than getting to the point of there being an incident, we're now considering that the fact that your data is on the dark web is the incident. The way the platform works is it uses APIs which subscribe to all of these different effectively service providers of raw data storage. As new posts are pushed onto these platforms by known threat actors or even unknown threat actors, effectively that data is then cached into the platform. It's then analyzed against the keyword searches that we've implemented. So your domains, IP addresses, confidential project names, all sorts of things can be configured with regards to what it's looking for. But what that does then is it triggers a proactive alert to us. We can then go and look at it. Well, the really key thing here is the caching, because what normally happens in these scenarios is somebody will paste the data out of a system. So you compromise the system, you log into, or you can just go to Pastebin, you don't even need to log in, drop the data there, and then go to a separate machine and then download the data, which means you don't actually have to push the data out to your own IP address. You're effectively proxying the data through a website. So the key thing here is that we cache that data. So if you then do go in and delete it afterwards, if you did log in as the threat actor, if you were foolish enough to do that, then that would obviously be tracked. But what you've got here is the fact that we're highlighting immediately as that post's made. We're getting a proactive response into us. We do an investigation. We get the proactive remediation recommendation to you. And the key thing here really is if you've got something like a SQL database, which maybe is your customer logins, that gets compromised and it's not got salted and hashed passwords, they're leaked onto the internet. If you can get out to your customer base quickly and tell them that actually you need to go and change your passwords, and if you reuse this password elsewhere, you should probably go and change that. You're probably going to be in a situation that you're ahead of the attacker then utilizing the data. You can then do a separate stream to investigate why it happened. But the key thing is that the data lost is the data lost, rather than it being a entry point for further loss of data and potentially financial impact on your business. As it shows in the graphic up here, the alert comes into our IT service management platform. So again, you get the advantage of the fact that as soon as the platform detects that data leakage, a ticket's generated, an SLA starts rolling, and you're made aware. And therefore, dependent on what data's there, you as a business can make a decision on how critical that is for you. And obviously with our IT service management platform, you can define with us what you want to happen 24 hours a day. So if it's that this incident, you consider it to be a P1, that's configured in our platform. We'll raise a P1, we'll follow the P1 process of waking up your CIO at 3 o'clock in the morning. If you deem it a P5, and obviously the CIO doesn't need to be woken up at 5 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning for that, then you end up in a situation that we process it, we provide the intelligence around it, and obviously you can then provide a guidance to your end user if it's an end user, or IT if it's a system that's been compromised. Yeah, and that's about it from me on that. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Dave. Great timing. So with that, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to use to just to let you know, if despite your best efforts you do fall victim to a successful cyber attack, or anything with regard to any of the issues that Dave's kindly taken us through on this webinar, GCI have a cybersecurity incident response team on hand 24/7. You have got the details of that in a follow-up email. If you have any questions with regard to this webinar, I've got you on full screen. I do see the speech bubble flashing. However, we will have to address those questions directly following the webinar. But I just wanted to give you a heads up with regard to our next webinar, which we are doing in association with Acuity Law. So they're an award-winning progressive law firm with a hugely experienced cyber law practice. They're doing some really interesting things around legal aspects of compliance. But we will be covering the technology and services angles. So between us, we'll have most bases covered, and we'll be sharing some really useful information. So that's on the 30th of July. If you'd like to register, you'll be receiving a follow-up email to this webinar. But with that, with David, I'd like to thank you very much for all those who've returned, and thank you very much for everyone who's a new registrant to these webinars. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, everyone. Thank you. Bye.